now let's take a look at all the sidelines that white has in this opening. The sidelines in the Pearts, as far as I understand, are all the lines where white avoids making the most popular second and third move. So after white plays d4, knight c3, we get into sort of the regular Pearts. And this will be, of course, our main focus of the attention. But of course, to give you a full repertoire, even if it's simplified, so to speak, we need to at least stop a little bit at the sidelines, yeah, so that you are covered for sorts of all cases. So the sidelines here are thus the ones where white essentially does not play d4 or does not play knight c3. So let's take a look at the lines where white avoids playing d4. Basically, the popular setups, they include all sorts of lines with the bishop coming to c4. Sometimes white can try to just develop the knight and see what happens later. Or some people like pushing the f pawn and then develop. So these are also the most popular lines, especially online. A lot of people try some sort of sidelines because honestly they're not ready to play the main lines of the Pearts, and it's not because they have something in mind, yeah, usually just to avoid theory. So let's have a look at these moves one by one. So bishop c4 is and actually it's a popular square online, especially. People like it, yeah, just placing the bishop on c4 because they vaguely feel that one day the f7 pawn might become vulnerable. But let me just color it once more. But it doesn't really ever happen in this opening. f7 is not a problem here, and the bishop on c4 is not as active as you would think, because very often black has the chance to go e6, d5, and these pawns will block this diagonal very nicely. So this bishop on c4 can sometimes turn into a problem. So first we go knight f6. We attack this pawn, but also, just in case we cover the f7 pawn, now, okay, white cannot really attack this. I mean, all those sort of vague hopes that white had to go queen f3, queen h5, now they don't make any sense. And white has to now think of how to defend the e4 pawn. d3 is the popular way of doing it, makes sense together with bishop c4. There is certain harmony in white's setup. White brought the bishop to c4, played d3, and now is ready to go knight f3, castles long, and whatnot, right? And we play e6. Of course, we could do lots of other things, but I quite like e6 because we are beginning to build this wall of pawns to make the bishop on c4 passive. So this is a concept here. The idea is just to play d5 next, and whatever white does, white will end up with a passive bishop, yeah? At least temporarily, and this will be more than enough for us in this opening. So knight f3 is normal. Anyway, white could not prevent d5. Black goes d5. So now usually white will take, black will take, and whatever white will do, white will end up with a bad bishop. So either this bishop will be on b3 or it will go to b5, a4, but either way, somewhere it will have sort of a passive square to occupy, and black will just proceed with bishop d6 and castles long, yeah? All of this, of course, assuming white will take on d5, yeah? We don't want to lose our piece after e5. So this is basically it. You do not need to know anything else after bishop c4. And really not such a big move, so we might as well move along. So let's go back to this position and play knight f3. So knight f3 is a well, it's a normal move, of course, never a mistake to make a developing move. And usually, if your opponent plays this move, you will know that, okay, sooner or later, white will probably play d4 and transpose into some main lines. Yeah. So now we'll take a look at the setups where white sort of continues to avoid playing d4 in the future as well, right? So tries to be original. Let's attack this pawn. This pawn is hanging now, and normally white will defend it by going knight c3. So three popular ways, so to speak, to defend this pawn, right? Knight c3 is normal, d3 happens, and sometimes people play e5. So these three moves we'll try to cover. So if white plays d3, I mean, you cannot really stop white from doing something like this. Very solid, very sort of central, also very passive, right? This bishop is not great on f1 and not threatening, right? You can develop in any way you like here. Might as well play g6, a usual setup. After all, we are playing the Pierce. And you will just continue bishop g7, castles long, and then depending on how you feel today, you might as well play e5 or c5. I mean, this is then the choice. But basically, this setup is not at all threatening. So yeah, white gets a solid position, a boring position, but nothing good. So let's move on. The beauty of looking at sidelines in a simplified course is that we don't have to sort of just over obsess about every single detail and move at a healthy speed. So let's look at another move. E5 is actually not really a good move. White is not ready for this. Simply, we just take what white has to take, and knight bd7, and we already feel something is going slightly wrong for white because black, and this should normally never happen in an opening, black is ahead in development, right? White has just one developed piece, and this piece is attacked, and black has two pieces developed, and white has to do something about this. And white cannot even, play the usual d4 because black will take on e5, take on d1, play knight g4. And okay, you know the drill, right? White will not be able to keep material. So you don't have to think too deeply about this. This is a line you will probably never encounter. Once again, black is just doing really well here, and this is because white played e5, not a good move. And now let's take a look at probably the best way to defend this pawn was knight c3. And we just continue making, our moves. Basically, these three moves are what basically they are the backbone of our opening, right? So we might as well stick to those moves most of the cases. And now if you take a look at this position, you will probably want to play d4 with white, right? And that's probably what white will do now, or maybe move later, 2 moves later. But anyway, you will transpose to some other line covered in this course, right? So we don't have to do this here. So knight f3, knight c3, possible way to play, but doesn't really do anything except for transposing back into the known theory. So we go back, and we can also take a look at f4. f4 is, I actually have myself a bit of an affinity for this setup. I like the pawns. I very often try to get the pawns in different openings, also with black. If my opponent goes c4, I sometimes go e5, f5, this sort of things. So white's idea is to continue with knight f3, develop this bishop, and then castle. So this is sort of the basics of it. And black, of course, sticks to a normal setup, knight f6. For now, we're attacking this pawn. Knight c3, g6. So we are sticking with our moves, with our opening, planning to go bishop g7, castle short. Now, knight f3 is normal, that's why you go f4 to free this square for the knight, and now sort of your pawns are not blocked, right? So this is the whole setup, so to speak. Play bishop g7, we are ready to castle. And yeah, in general, it's just one of the beautiful bits of this opening is that how quickly black gets ready to castle, which is really not a given in many other openings, right? Here, the speed with which we play knight f6, bishop g7, castles, very often brings our king into safety much faster than white's. Something to remember, and something which is quite unique for this opening. You don't have many openings where black habitually castles faster than white. So this is a good thing. So now the most popular move in this position is bishop c4. Once again, of course, white could go d4, but d4 just transposes into one of the very many, why did I say very many? One of the very main lines of our opening, right? The Austrian attack. But by now, when our opponent played f4 and then knight f3, we realized d4 was never part of the plan. So bishop c4 is normal. And now, of course, we could castle and get a properly playable position. But there is also no reason why we shouldn't go for the most direct continuation. Yeah, now we can take knight takes e4. A well-known combination based on the fact that d5 will attack two things. And black, as you will see, not only gets the piece back, but also gets some positional benefits. So now, if white takes knight e4, d5, black is just really doing well, gets a piece back on the next move, and very often ends up with a pair of strong bishops. So it only makes sense that white takes on f7. At least white gets something in return for the trouble. And king takes f7, knight e4. Now, once again, we have the bishops, but at least we do have to, we have to sort of keep it fair. We do have to take care of the king on f7. So throughout this whole course, I will, and I have been trying to stay objective. So I will not just, praise the black's position just because it's our repertoire, right? So yeah, we do have the bishops, we have the weaker king, we have to acknowledge this and do something about this. So very often when you have a king on f7, the following maneuver is good to remember. Black plays rook f8. So essentially we are castling short. It takes a bit longer than just castling, right? But we do get the same setup. Very often when your king is on f7, this maneuver, rook f8, king g8 will come to rescue. They sometimes call it the artificial castling I'm not sure it's a great name, but that's what they call it. So white castles, there was nothing really to gain by giving any checks. Black completes the maneuver, and now the king is fine, and the bishops are still there, and black is actually doing quite well. The bishops will be quite strong, and the one thing which you might want to pay attention to in this position and in many others like this, white's pawn on f4 potentially limits the scope. Let me just make it red of this bishop. This is a theme throughout this opening very often. Once the pawn is on f4, this bishop on c1 has problems getting active. Yeah, this is a theme for the Austrian attack. Many other lines you'll see it throughout this course quite often. So whenever the white pawn is on f4, you have to see, is this pawn limiting the white bishop on c1 or not? So this is very much the case here, and black is doing very well, which I think covers our sidelines on move 2. So basically on move 2 we looked at all sorts of continuations. We have a basic idea on how to continue. So now let's move on and play d4. Basically, as I mentioned, the sidelines or the early sidelines are here more or less for the sake of, well, completeness, to give you an all-round idea about this opening and about, well, any opening actually, right? Because the things you will learn in this opening, in the periods, they will actually help you in other openings as well. That's how chess works, actually. The general ideas are the same throughout openings, and it's nice to learn them. But anyway, let me not get too deep into philosophical debates here. You probably want to learn something about this opening. Let's take a look at the position after d4, and we go knight f6, and now white has basically 4 moves that we need to cover that are not knight c3. So once again, knight c3 is white's main move and will be the main topic of this whole course. So for now we can sort of ignore knight c3 and see what other moves white has. So all of these moves, they will have to somehow deal with the fact that the white pawn on e4 is hanging, right? So this helps us to sort of make a list of things we need to cover, and these moves will include f3, normal thing, defending the pawn, bishop d3, a good developing move to cover the pawn, knight d2, sort of a developing move of sorts, but not an ideal place for the knight, blocking this bishop once again. This bishop has a difficult destiny in this opening. And of course, white could sort of get nervous and play e5, but as you will see, this is not a good move. Very strangely popular, especially in online practice. A lot of people sort of, they see the knight on f6, they go e5, they must be thinking this is an Alekhine opening or something, right? So this is our list, and now let's cover these moves sort of one by one. So now the moves, the sidelines on move 3. The one that we could really sort of altogether skip is e5. I just left it in this course because it's just sort of so unusually popular online. Like in blitz games and whatnot, and some people just often just play e5. Just loses a pawn, really. Yeah? We just take, it's a forced line. Really nothing to say about it. Black attacks these 2 pawns and wins one of them. So basically, because the f2 pawn will also lose the rook on h1, white has to defend it, and black will end up with central pawn. So nothing more to say about this. It's just that sometimes people play this for some strange reason. So any other move, of course, is stronger. In fact, just sacrificing this pawn on e4 would be stronger. But let's look at how white can defend the pawn, right? So one of the positional solid ways to defend is f3. White sort of builds the pawn chain and basically tries to go into the King's Indian defense. Now, if we were to go g6, bishop g7, and then castle, we'll end up in a proper King's Indian. Nothing wrong about King's Indian. I myself, I think it's a great opening, but not a part of our course, right? So I couldn't just, direct you there. And I tried finding something which is solid, interesting, and not the King's Indian, right? So I started analyzing e5, and turned out it's a good move. It's a good move, and not just different from the King's Indian, but also in many ways, I thought a better version. Yeah, sometimes our ability to go bishop e7 and castles gives us some flexibility, and also saves a move. If you take a good look at this pawn structure, this position, you will notice that the fianchetto takes 3 moves, and bishop e7 and castles takes only 2. It will be rarely important, but sometimes, in some lines that we save a tempo could come in handy. Yeah? So this is one of the advantages of this setup. Now, of course, this setup allows white to go into the ending. So white has here 3 sort of main reactions. This include the knight e2 to defend the d4 pawn with a knight. They include d5 to just sort of move the pawn and try to get the King's Indian setup, or of course d takes e5, trying to exchange the queens. So these 3 moves we need to cover and pay some attention to. So let's now see what happens if white takes on e5. It basically leads to an equal ending. Of course, there is some slight problem connected to the fact that we can not castle anymore. So the king on d8 is uncastled, but more or less it's an ending, and this king will usually find a nice spot on e7. And that would be sort of a safe spot for the king. Yeah, we develop the bishop, put the king on e7, so this is not a problem. One other thing which is important in this position is that unlike a similar position in the Philidor, white cannot attack the e5 pawn, because the f3 pawn takes this square from the knight. And it's a good thing to sort of pay attention to. Yeah, the f3 pawn is usually very solid, gives white the central control, but takes the square from the knight. Yeah, so the g1 knight is unhappy about this. Bishop c4 is very natural. Attacks the f7 pawn, and yeah, many ways to play this position with black. I quite like the normal king e8, defending this pawn in a natural way. I sort of prefer it to playing bishop e6. A lot of people, they have the affinity to this method of playing, so to speak, but black ends up with doubled e6, e5 pawns, and they're very often sort of weak later on. Sometimes you have this in chess, right? You have the pawns that do not look weak now. They could be even useful now, control a lot of squares, but they have the tendency to get weak later on. So let us avoid weaknesses from now on, and for now. So let us avoid weaknesses, and let us try not to overcomplicate our language. Play king e8. Bishop e3 is normal. White tries, by playing bishop e3, in this position, white tries to avoid bishop c5, yeah, so by controlling this square. So quite logical. And now black has to find a way to play bishop c5. Not difficult. Plays knight d7, sort of threatening bishop c5 again. And in general, this line, I mean, we can look at many different ways to play for white and for black, but basically it's an equalish ending, nothing for us to be afraid of. Knight c3 is natural. White is threatening knight b5. These pawns can sometimes become vulnerable, so it's good to just play c6. This little hero of a pawn in the structures controls vital squares and makes both white knight on c3 and the bishop on c4 a little nervous, because they have, I mean, there's two pieces now, they have fewer prospects, and you will see this again and again throughout this opening, that once the black pawn appears on c6, especially the destiny of this knight on c3 is very limited. The c3 knight, once the pawn is on c6, cannot go, or naturally cannot go to d5, cannot go to b5, and cannot really go to a4 either, which means from now on this knight is forced into passivity. I mean, the only way for this knight to be redeployed is to go back somewhere, which is not great. So knight g2 is normal. Once again, this pawn takes the square from this knight, so white's knight is forced into a more passive square. So play bishop c5, and black gets very comfortable endings. Likely these bishops will be traded. Then we'll get our king to e7. As the dark squared bishops are gone, no problems. And then we can get optimistic and start, rolling on the queen side. I think in general this endgame is not problematic for black, and we can move on. So f3 e5, and we can take a look at another central continuation, knight e2. So nothing works quite as well as a sip of green tea when you're recording a chess course. And now let's move on. So knight e2, white's idea is to just continue developing. Play c4, knight c3, and proceed. In this position, black can do a lot of things, but I quite like a plan which is, at least which was, until I started looking at this in detail for this course, was quite new to me. Black takes on d4, knight takes d4, or you don't take with the queen, because it would run into knight c6, so people don't usually do this. So knight d4 is quite normal, and now d5. So this was something of a surprise for me when I discovered this very recently, and turns out it's a very promising continuation for black, which forces white into some very sharp territory. White basically needs to go e5, otherwise there would be sort of no point to white's setup, because if white were to take on d5 and allow knight d5, bishop c5, everything in white's position would be a bit weak. The king on e1 and the knight on d4, everything would be strange. Yeah? So e5 is the only way to play it, really. And now the idea is knight h5. This is basically the point of black's plan. You are threatening queen h4 check. And of course, this is something white will not allow, but this gives us a move. This gives us a tempo, because now white is forced to spend some time to take care of this threat. So white normally plays g3, and we use the tempo that we want to play c5, so as to get this powerful pawn center, once again with a gain of time by attacking this knight on d4, and basically this position is just very good for black. Black can always save this h5 knight by playing g6, and then this knight will join the battle on e6 or f5, and not a very practical way for white to play, as far as I can tell you. I analyze this position, and there is nothing promising about it for white. Yeah, white just should not really do this. Yeah, so this is basically the story of knight e2, the move which is well known, which is quite popular, and the move that white probably should not play. And this leaves us with white's, I think, main move, d5, quite a logical one. At that, white starts building up the pawn center, yeah, as they would do in the Zemish system of the King's Indian. But there are some differences here. So play bishop e7. This is the main difference. As I already mentioned, first of all, we get to castle one move earlier, and the bishop on e7 has some other advantages. Can sometimes go to g5, can sometimes go to h4, and also the fact that a pawn is on g7, this fact makes our king on g8 safer. So there are a lot of potential advantages to having the bishop on e7. And now white can try different setups. Mainly they include either playing c4 or not. So white can try to play like white would play in the Zemish, c4, knight c3, and so on. Or white can also try to save the tempo on this plan. So now let's have a look at how this would look in real life. So for instance, c4, this is the pawn center. A5 is very useful for the knight on a6. Later we can use the square c5, and this pawn on a5 safeguards the square basically forever by not allowing b4. So a5 is useful. Knight c3, of course, the most natural way to continue. Knight a6, sort of follow the plan. Bishop e3. Not giving too much detail here because this moves natural and all a part of the same plan. And now things get concrete when we play knight d7. So this is basically where we create a positional threat, or a positional possibility at least, of playing bishop g5, or sometimes bishop h4 to provoke a weakness. And this knight, as you'll see, it has some sort of a destiny of its own. Yeah? It has a plan. Queen d2 is very natural. White prevents bishop g5 by controlling the square. And now, a bit surprisingly also for me, the place knight dc5. You don't see this very often, right? I mean, once you play knight a6, you would think it would be this knight that goes to c5. But there is a very good reason for playing knight dc5. First of all, we are preparing the breakthrough with f5. And the other knight can join the fight sometimes on b4. And in fact, if black gets to play f5, then black could actually have a powerful initiative, because white's king will not really be safe. Like, you could go to c1, but you really don't want to be on c1 with the white king, so things could get tricky for white very quickly. And there's probably enough knowledge. I would feel comfortable playing this position with black. Basically, with no extra knowledge, I think this is enough. So we can move back and see what happens if white plays bishop e3, which somehow has established itself as the most popular way to play. White keeps the option of playing c4, but keeps also the possibility of playing without c4. Yeah, so keeping it flexible, if I may. So we castle, as I mentioned already, and I will mention it throughout the course again and again at different spots. So don't hold it against me. I have some themes which I think are important, and I keep returning to them. One of them is, please castle your king early. It's always a good thing, not just in this opening, right? Just castling the king is such a big part of staying safe in chess, and one of the great bits about this opening is that we can castle so early. It's a great thing. So queen d2, white continues the plan, and now black has a very big choice, and I quite like c6 here, just beginning to play against the white pawn on d5, and trying to sort of leave white with a weakness there, right? If we take, white takes, and then we can start attacking this pawn. This pawn can quickly become weak, so it's normal for white to defend it with c4 in order to avoid being left with a weakness. But this allows us to play this very powerful gambit with b5. White, black, in fact, uses the fact that they are better developed. So this pieces are already developed. The king is already in the center, and the better development gives us the moral right, so to speak, to start attacking. And we target white's center before it has a chance of becoming very strong. So once the knight is on c3, everything would be very solid, so we have to attack it before the knight gets there. So we're threatening once again to leave white with a lot of weaknesses on c4 and d5, and white takes the pawn, which is principled, but not without risks, right? So we take on d5. This is, of course, the idea. And now white will not be able to avoid taking and having a weakness on d5 forever. So takes, bishop b7 is natural, knight c3, knight bd7. And basically, this is the point, right? We are threatening knight b6. And it's difficult for white to keep this pawn on d5 alive. Sometimes our plans include, let me just make it green, queen a5, rook fc8, sometimes a6. We have a lot of play for this sacrificed pawn, and it's not even clear if white can keep this pawn alive for much longer. Yeah, white can play bishop c4, but then knight b6, followed by a6. Whatever white does, black retains a powerful initiative, and this is probably enough knowledge about this f3 line, so we can also move to some other continuations. So moving back now, all the way to f3. This was the position where we had all this choice, all this number of opportunities for white. One of them, sophisticated looking moves, but not very threatening ones, is knight d2. It's an idea similar to bishop d3. The idea is the same, to build up this natural development, so to speak. But the knight is actually not great on d2 because it blocks, once again, this bishop on c1. So this is a drawback, and also black has some very concrete ideas. I quite like this sort of new idea that I discovered. Play e5, c3 is normal, white protects the pawn and tries to build up a strong pawn center. And once again, we attack the pawn center before it has a chance to become strong. So take, and play queen e7. So this is the idea which I discovered when preparing for this course. The white pawn on e4 is hanging, and black has a lot of ideas, tactical ideas to make white's life more difficult. f3 would protect the e4 pawn quite nicely, but would leave white in a very sort of clumsy position. For instance, if you go f3 here, knight c6, I mean, this knight on g1 is not great, the knight on d2 is not great, everything is a bit awkward about white's position, so this is not something white should do, and it's very normal to develop the piece and to protect the e4 pawn at the same time. But of course, we had an idea, and our idea is knight takes e4, sort of eliminate the white's pawn center once and for all. And after any recapture, we just play d5, and like this, and win the piece back. And that's basically all there is to it. Yeah, knight e4, d5. White has some ideas here, but they're not very dangerous. Black gets the piece back, and white has to make sure that there will be more to their position than just the weak pawn on d4. So not an easy line for white to play, and I think this is a very easy repertoire for black against knight d2. So we can sort of move back. This is the story of knight d2, and we can move on. And the stronger move, and I think the more harmonious move, is bishop d3. White does not yet commit this knight to any square, and tries to play the same setup. And maybe later the knight will go to d2, maybe not. Yeah, so this is a more harmonious way of playing. And our reaction is the same for now. Play e5. It's very central. Of course, we could always we could build up a repertoire around the traditional g6, bishop g7. But in all the main lines, our bishop is there, so we can use this opportunity to look at some other structures, at structures which are not quite common for this opening. So maybe we'll learn more together in this way, hopefully. I actually personally, I think I learned quite a lot when preparing for this course, so I think so will you. Now white has to react, right? Once again, the d4 pawn is hanging, and white needs to react. White has to show their hand, so to speak, and as often the possible reactions, they include either moving this pawn, taking the pawn on e5, or protecting this pawn on d4, one way or the other. So the most sort of easily discardable move here is d takes e5. There is just no advantage for white in this symmetrical structure. White has a pawn on e4, black has a pawn on e5. And very soon we'll get something very symmetrical, something very equal, which does not mean that it will be a draw, right? I mean, the stronger player will usually prevail in these positions. Plenty of possibility for either one player to go wrong. So this is not dangerous for black at all. This is maybe slightly more to the point. Once again, just like in the f3 line, white tries to build the pawn center, get the mighty pawns, and the f3 square is still free, so white can still develop the knight to f3. The drawback is that this bishop on d3 can also be vulnerable, and we use it by playing knight bd7. The idea is to go knight c5, attacking the pawn, the bishop, and white is not in time to do everything. So ideally, white would like to go c4, knight c3, and then be in time to go bishop c2 to sort of move the bishop to the safe square. But there is just no time to do everything. So white plays c4, knight c5. This pawn is hanging, knight c3. And now before white can complete the setup and keep the bishops and everything, we take this bishop. You might not think that the bishops, are active in this very closed position, but, it is closed now. It might be open tomorrow. So who knows how the life will go, right? So queen d3, bishop e7, and now we have the bishops, and we finish the development. White usually plays knight ge2, knight g1 to e2. Anyway, white usually develops the knight to e2. Sometimes I'm with some surprise, I discovered that some normal sounds are actually difficult for me to pronounce, especially, knight ge. It's very strange, yeah. But okay, let's move on. Yeah, so knight goes to e2. We castle. This knight is on the way to g3 to prevent black playing from f5 for now. But black also has other plans, right? We can play e5, knight to c5, bishop to g5, and basically we keep the bishops, we keep active plans, and everything is good. So enough for us to go on in this position for sure. So let's move back and check white's other moves. after e5. So one other move, which is not very common, is knight f3. It's once again not a mistake, but not a very common move and not a very threatening one. Take. Usually we don't immediately abandon the center. We could just play knight bd7 or knight c6, but there is a very sort of concrete point here. Knight takes d4, g6. So the point here is that after black develops the bishop, both the pawn on e4 and the knight on d4 are slightly vulnerable, more vulnerable than usually. And black has an easy time attacking these two squares and gets a very good play. So castles, bishop g7. If the bishop had been, somewhere else, for instance, where would this bishop be? Let's imagine a world where white played g3, bishop g2, then white would have an easier time protecting this knight on d4. As it is, this knight on d4 forever remains slightly vulnerable. And that's why this usual setup with c4, knight c3 is more difficult for white to handle, because this knight is forever hanging. So white will probably develop the pieces normally. Castle, bishop g5, c6, just to avoid any tricks with knight d5. It's important to control the squares. And after this, black can proceed with queen b6, attacking the knight, attacking the pawn, forcing them back most likely, and then just developing in a natural way. Black gets sort of an easy flowing game. I think it's enough coverage for this very rare line. So we move back. And finally, we arrive at probably the most popular, the most maybe also harmonious sideline against the Peers, where white plays bishop d3 and c3. So these two moves, they sort of define this particular line. This pawn defends the pawn on d4, the bishop defends the pawn on e4. So there is certain harmony to white's setup. This is not to be disputed. And once again, black has a lot of reasonable continuations. I myself, I have played this line for white when I was a kid, which was a long time ago. Yeah? You might be surprised how old I am by now, but yeah. Let's focus on the chess contents of this. So anyway, in my younger days when I played this line, my opponents would play knight c6, they would sometimes play knight bd7, they would play g6, lots of possible continuations here. But for this course, I quite like d5, which is very direct. And white only has one reasonable way to continue, taking with this pawn, leaves white with weaknesses in the center, nothing great. So probably white will take d takes e5, knight takes e4, and this position doesn't look like the Peers, but anyway, it's a nice structure to have seen. Black wants to go knight c6, this knight can go to c5. Black has a lot of ways to develop in a very, very natural way, which is nice, right? Knight f3, useful to prepare castling short. Knight c5, attacking this bishop and forcing white to do something. Bishop c2 is very natural, of course. White uses the square, which is prepared by the pawn. So nice harmonious play. Bishop g4. We activate this bishop before sort of finishing the kingside development, and this has a reason. Yeah, you will see very soon. So castles, knight c6. So basically, we're not so much threatening this pawn because, well, maybe it's difficult to take this pawn, right? I mean, we would have to watch out for tactical problems along the e file. So not exactly attacking the pawn, we're preparing d4. This is sort of more of a threat. And also that's why we did not really develop our king side yet, is because we're actually generating threats in the center. So rook e1 is very popular here, d4. And basically, now if white takes on d4, then we can always take, and then attack the queen on f3, the bishop on c2. And in general, I just have the feeling that black is having a more active position, right? Black has a threat of d3. Black can also castle long. There are a lot of possibilities, and just visually, I have the feeling that black is having an easier life here. White can, of course, make a useful move with tempo, but it doesn't change very much, right? Black keeps the pin, and now if white tries, to do anything smart, like g4 or b4, we can always counterattack with d3. And this is a sharp position, and normally not a part of anybody's repertoire with white. And I assure you, in a real game, this position will not be easy for white to handle. So I feel this is a very promising direction for black to go for.